I just call on Mr. Alan Jones, AO, to move the vote of thanks.
Thank you. I used to call him Prime Minister. He's the former Prime Minister, John. Professor Flint and those people associated with the function today, and to those, good to see Corey Bernardi here, Senator Bernardi, a man who's not wishy-washy. You can't hear, eh? I once was speaking at a function and I said, can you hear me up the back, which is a stupid question to ask because if you can't hear, you can't answer. But someone had too much to drink and he stood up and he said, I can, but I'm happy to swap with anyone who can't. Listening to John speak, I couldn't help but feel that perhaps today is a bit of a metaphor of Australian society. That in many ways we are celebrating the fact that common sense prevailed 10 years ago, but we also had an affirmation from John Howard today that the public's common sense was at odds with all of the Labor Party and 3/4 of the leadership of the Liberal Party. One wonders whether much has changed. Whether or not those people who purport very authoritatively on a range of issues to speak for the people do understand what the people think. And when you had, as we had all those years ago, such a comprehensive rejection of what the Labor Party had persuasively, or thought they'd persuasively argued, and indeed what the leadership of the Liberal Party, with the exception of the Prime Minister, argued, and they are completely rejected by the wider electorate, you have to wonder what the level of consultation is and what the extent within the parliamentary system is of an understanding of what the public really are about. I know that in recent times it's become rather fashionable to be speaking to Malcolm Turnbull, and I remember, dear Malcolm, ringing the open line when I'd made some comments about the whole debate, demanding that he come on the program. My staff are not used to those sorts of unilateral demands, and they said, no, it can't happen. And I said, who was that? And they said, oh, it was Malcolm Turnbull, and he's in a rage. And I said, well, let him come on, put him up. He's in a rage, let's go. And we had this very robust and spirited exchange, but the one issue that he couldn't address, which of course in many ways I suppose won the debate, was the argument, the onus upon them to establish what was the nature of the change that they were talking about. And even to this day they can't articulate that. And so I postulated to my audience that if you don't know what they're talking about, vote no. It's a fair proposition. And I can tell you there weren't many people around saying that at the time. But in many ways I think the way to get the public on side is to try and crystallise all this stuff to something that is very, very simple. And I think John made these points. They didn't know whether they wanted the President to be nominated or the President to be elected, and OK, well, we'll elect him, that's fine. Now, what's the relationship between his power and the Prime Minister's power? I haven't thought of that. Well, who will determine those powers? How do we get rid of him? How long will he be serving? None of this stuff was put together. A bit like some of the debate that's going on today, I would have thought. And watch the public move on some of those issues, I can tell you, on the great moral crises of our time are no longer going to be those, I can tell you. The public are very angry that things are being assumed about them which don't adequately represent the way they think. And you can't. One of the great virtues of John Howard as the Prime Minister was that he talked to the people and he listened to the people, and he was a good listener as well as a good talker, and you have to do that. And we're increasingly being told today what we should think and what's good for us. Well, I'm sorry, the public out there are not too partial to that approach towards democracy. So, with what's happening today, I guess, with that ETS. Isn't it lovely how we're calling this thing a carbon pollution reduction scheme? I love that. If someone hasn't yet told me how you separate carbon from carbon dioxide, someone hasn't told me that carbon dioxide is a pollutant, but that's what's being taught in the schools. And John, you made this point about the Bill of Rights being a real crisis. I think one of the real crises we have is what is in fact happening in the classroom. And there's no... You know, we know that there are good teachers out there and so on, but I mean, this has become vehicle, and we saw this at the last election. I mean, there were people in the classroom arguing about work choices and all this sort of stuff. I mean, this doesn't belong in the classroom, but now the incumbent government is aware of all of this and is now got a far more dangerous bill, I believe, before the Parliament than the Bill of Rights, because that won't succeed, the Bill of Rights. It won't succeed. But this business about reducing the voting age, there is a reason why we're on YouTube and Facebook and Twitter. There's a reason why the incumbent Prime Minister talks about having boggon moth pies on his little Twitter page, because if we can get the 16 and 17-year-olds on side, then we most probably will think we're there forever. Now, I've got nothing against 16 and 17-year-olds, but I mean, we are making decisions at a voting level about a prospectus, namely the future direction of the country, which requires a fairly sophisticated understanding of the issues. But to sort of sneak this thing through, and again dress it up as an extension of the Liberal process and the democratic process, is, I think, a very significant threat. We may as well sort of throw the whole show away. So that's a Senator Ludwig and others are going to have a fight on their hands, we hope. But to the matters of today, it was a landslide, and I think the former Prime Minister has alluded to that. But nonetheless, one of the things that we have to concede is that in spite of the 73% of the electorate opposing it, Republicans being what they are, they don't want to accept the result. And so they've consistently refused to accept the people's verdict, and that happens on a range of fronts, not just here. And one EU politician explained the way they think after a failed referendum when he said, the people must keep on voting until they get it right. It's extraordinary, isn't it? I mean, you dare disagree and you're a pariah. Or you dare to disagree and your integrity is challenged. We believe in freedom of speech, but only if you say what they agree with. And you're right about the Bill of Rights and Freedoms, because one freedom collides with another. How do we resolve those collisions? And to transfer the parliamentary process into the hands of the judiciary is a nonsense, and it has been a failure. So what we have, of course, is that the Republicans diverting vast amounts, and they did this then and they'll do it again, of taxpayers' funds from schools, where it can go, good causes, the disabled, the mentally ill, schools and hospitals, police. We don't have enough police in New South Wales, but we've got money for these causes, and they go with their hand out and expect the taxpayer to fund an initiative which was rejected 10 years ago, which is the reason we're here today. And so a significant part of this involves a whole series of government inquiries and reports, endless. We've been through all of this. They've had their chance, we've got their case. If you're interested, you can go to the library, you can read it all. There's no harm in finding out what the Republicans stand for. But they can't explain their story. And they'll never be able to explain their story. And so they want to hide behind this notion, and we've got a current massive lump of legislation before us now. I mean, may I just interpolate, fancy going to Copenhagen to sign a treaty when the electorate haven't even been told A, that the treaty exists, and B, what its detail is, and C, that it spells out a world government which will transfer wealth from the developed countries to the developing countries.